my next guest, who is Ralph Cilento. He's a former NYPD Lieutenant Detective Commander, has done many investigations throughout his career, and has been very helpful to us here at Fox 5, trying to understand some of these steps and also what's happening with this Nancy Guthrie case now on day 12. And Ralph, one of the things I want to ask you about is reports from the local officials in Arizona saying that they have received over 18,000 tips from the public. But my question is, why wasn't that appeal made earlier on? We're at almost the end of the second week of this ordeal for the family, and our hearts and our thoughts and prayers go out to the family, of course, dealing with this. But what about the timeline, and what do you think are some of the missteps here?
Well, the easy answer to that is that when you can't ask the public for tips if they don't know anything, because otherwise they have nothing to produce to give to the public. Otherwise, it's like looking for a needle in a stack of needles. Once the video was data mined from the doorbell camera, now they have images to put out, and they had about 4,000 or so tips before that video went out. Now that the video has gone out, they have 12 and now 18,000 tips. So clearly the onslaught, the rush of tips is related to the video going out. And if my phone calls serve me correctly, a lot of those have to do with the clothing. The people that I've spoken to say that a lot of that has to do with the clothing, that they're calling in. I think I recognize that jacket. I think I recognize those shoes. And even if they don't know the perpetrator, tips are coming in about the clothing. So my sources tell me that they all but have the shoes identified now, down to one or two types of shoes. I think the jacket is now identified. And so this is going to help them. Not necessarily the tipster doesn't know who the perpetrator is, but it might say, hey, I recognize that jacket. I have that jacket, or I have those shoes. So, clearly the influx, the rush of phone tips coming in are related to directly related to the video from the doorbell camera being released.
Now, in terms of those images that were released, a lot was made of the gloves. Like it looked like he had on maybe a couple pair of gloves or like
Right.
cloth gloves underneath or whatever. We were told today that the Fox News reporting that there were 2 gloves found in the vicinity, like the
Right.
black surgical gloves. How much of a help can that be to investigators?
Well, I mean, it could be a tremendous help because you don't know what's inside those gloves or on the outside of the gloves. Now, we don't know what happened in the house, but if he's wearing those gloves when he goes in the house, we all know by now that there's blood recovered in 2 different parts. Maybe the victim's blood is on those gloves. Maybe he has hair or skin cells inside those gloves. So, let's assume, for the sake of this exercise that we're on, that they are his gloves. They are the perpetrator's gloves. Then it could potentially be a huge break in the case if you're able to get DNA out of those gloves. And maybe the victim's blood is on the outside of the gloves, her DNA, maybe his hair or skin cells are in the inside of the gloves. So it could be a huge break in the case. It could not be. Depends how those gloves got there.
And then how do you assess the method of communication compared to other kidnapping or usual kidnapping cases where there wasn't any contact for almost 2 days, and then it's
Right.
these messages that may or may not have been sent by the actual kidnapper or kidnappers to the media and not to the family? No, unless there have been direct phone calls that we don't know about, or direct text messages with them that we don't know about. But if that's all there is, what does that tell you?
Well, nothing about this kidnapping case is ordinary. I've worked quite a few kidnappings for ransom. They're very difficult, and usually the perpetrators of the crime. I've talked to Antoine about this, and you both. Kidnapping only happens for 2 purposes. One is revenge, and the other one is profit. And if you think somebody wants to profit, the idea is to keep it quiet. You're hoping to get an affluent family who's not celebrity, who you contact them quietly, they pay quietly, and hopefully the media never finds out about it. If you're a kidnapper, the last thing you want is this to be out in the media. And it just goes to the atypical nature of this case. As far as we know, of course, we could be wrong. As far as we know, there has been no direct contact between the perpetrator of the crime themselves and the actual Guthrie family. There are notes being sent to media outlets, right? If you're a kidnapper and you want to keep it quiet and have a quick and fast and painless payday, the last thing you're going to do is to send a communique to TMZ. Why would you do that?
Right.
And so nothing about this case is normal. As far as I'm concerned now, it seems like what I feel now about what's going on. It almost seems like the search for Miss Guthrie and the notes that are going to the media are almost being investigated independent of each other. So, like the notes could be a red herring or some scammer, or it almost seems like they're being investigated separately, right?
Right. So in terms of kidnapping too, and we've seen this with NYPD and with the work that you did for our city, we thank you for that, those years of service, is a car, a vehicle has always, in many cases, been key to actually tracking down the victim or
Yes.
tracking down the suspects. But we haven't heard, what about license plate readers? What about cameras at stoplights or intersections? Obviously not in that neighborhood because it's a very private area, but there have to be major streets there. Was like where she would have been taken, especially at that hour of the night, in the middle of the night. What do you make of that?
Well, first of all, if there are LPRs, license plate readers around, even tangentially close to the neighborhood, I can tell you right now, they're mining that data for all it's worth. So we can, as outsiders looking in, we can't presume that they're not doing that. I can presume that they are doing that. If there are license plate readers anywhere around, they're looking at those. The problem is you need a vehicle. You need to know what you're looking for. They don't know what they're looking for yet, right? But we think that you have to operate in what you know. We know that although Miss Guthrie is old, as she's elderly, she's still an adult human. Adult humans, if they don't want to go against their will, 84 years old or not, they're going to put up a fight. I mean, everybody right now out in your world that's listening, consider your 84-year-old grandmother or your 84-year-old father-in-law. If you try to take him or her against their will, they're not just going to go with you. Elderly or not, they're going to put up a
Right.
fight. So they're going to need some kind of vehicle to move this person, but we don't know what kind of vehicle that is. And so what you have to do is what they're doing right now, which is you must play the hot hand. You work the evidence you have, not the evidence you don't have. Presumably, they don't have a vehicle yet. So they're working the evidence they have, which is the glove, the video footage. We all saw today that there was a tent put up, hastily put up in front of, excuse me, in front of Nancy Guthrie's home.
Right.
Right. And then we saw forensic equipment being loaded in there. And then the tent was quickly taken down. So you work the evidence that you have, or you create evidence. And what do I mean by create evidence?
Yeah. What do you mean by that? I want to hear that.
When you create evidence, you're trying to work something that you don't have. So we have the glove. We have another glove now recovered. We have video footage. So you create evidence. You do further video canvases, knock on doors, grid searches of the side of the highway, and you try to create evidence that's not there. You do interviews. Has anybody seen this person? You work the backpack, you work the shoes, you work the gloves, right? That evidence, the intelligence, the information surrounding that evidence doesn't exist yet. But when you find the store that sold the gloves, when you find the store that sold the backpack, sold the sneakers, now you are creating evidence that wasn't formerly there or undiscovered, right? You want to create evidence, do surveillance, knock on doors. Okay, so they're working what they have, and then they're going out trying to create new evidence, right? By interviewing people that may have seen something, further canvases, grid searches of the side of the highway, which we've seen that done already. So they're working every aspect of this case. LPRs, license plate readers, is going to be difficult right now because
Like you
you
said, they
know
don't know what they don't know what they're
they
looking
don't
for.
really know what they're looking for.
And then Ralph, we heard reports that the local, from under the sheriff, the Pima County sheriff, that the local officials had gone back, to your point, within the last couple days, had gone back door to door, basically to all of the homes in that area, again scouring for any type of video,
Yes.
ring cameras, anything like that.
Yeah.
And then,
Yeah. And then when you're done, Lisa, you do it again.
right,
And then after you do it again, you do it again. Right. And you make a list of no answer knocks. Whose door did you try to get to where they didn't answer? You make that list and you cull that list out smaller and smaller and smaller until you've live contact, like in person, until you've live contacted every person that lives in that neighborhood, that lives on that thoroughfare, approaching the house. And you get the list narrower and narrower until you've individually spoken to every single person. Now, you don't have to be a forensics expert to do this. You can believe me that the sheriff's office has forensic experts. Obviously, we know the FBI has forensic experts, some of the best. The entire FBI has a fantastic behavioral analysis unit
yep.
that's looking at the mannerisms and the behavior of the person at the front door. But failing that, you don't need to be some ultra high trained officer in order to knock on doors. These are the worker bees, not the specialists. You get worker bees, officers that are dedicated without a specialty to go knock on these doors and get answers from everybody. Do you have surveillance cameras? Right? Do you own a drone? Were you fooling around with your drone that day, flying it around? And so you ask a whole host of questions to these people. And you know what the criteria is for that, Lisa? You just have to care. If you get people that care a little bit, then these men and women of these police departments, these agencies, are going to do a good job on those door-to-door canvases, those boots on the ground grid searches along the side of the highways. You just have to care a little bit, and you'll get dedicated people to do a good job.
All right, Ralph, we have some comments and questions coming in on the live chat on YouTube. If you're watching on Fox Local, pop open another device and get on the Fox 5 NY YouTube page as well, and you can get your comments. This is from Willie's. Willie's asked, do you believe that there's going to be a resolution to this case, or do you believe that it will remain a cold case? What do you think about that, Ralph?
Well, let me say the good news first.
Okay.
The good news is that all of this talk, all of this 24/7 media coverage creates activity. It creates buzz around the case. Citizens are paying attention now. We remember what the OJ case was to the public. We remember what the Brian Kohlberger case was to the public. And so when you keep Miss Guthrie in the forefront of people's minds, it creates buzz, and that's good. So it creates a lot of tips, a lot of leads. Some of those don't go anywhere, but it keeps it in the forefront of people's minds. I do believe there will be an outcome to this case. Now, the bad news is we don't have her yet. And if I was a pessimist, I would say this person is in Mexico already.
And then what about the one of the things that investigators in this recanvass of the neighborhood, and this again, which you're talking about, is very standard for investigators, going back again over trying to find and get any pieces of video. They gave specific windows and dates. Obviously, January 31st, which was going into
Right.
the time of her disappearance, the time that she was last seen or heard from. But then also a couple of weeks earlier, within a very specific hour window. Does that give you any sense? Like, why would investigators be looking at specific windows and maybe a time frame on a specific day a couple of weeks earlier? Why would they be doing that?
Well, that's all to see who she came in contact with, right? Based off the leads, where was she, right? How do you solve these crimes? You start with the victim and you make concentric circles out. And this is not proprietary information. Any seasoned investigator knows this. You start with the victim and you make concentric circles out. Who did she know? Who's in her life? Did she see somebody at the adult recreation center where she goes, right, to play cards? Does she know somebody at the local store? Is it the pool guy, the landscaper guy, the UPS driver, right? All of these people that are in her lives. And then you get into the people that know those people, right? And so maybe it's not the landscaper, maybe it's his cousin, right? So you start with the victim, you go out and out and out. Now, what you just asked me, why did they go back further? It's probably off of a tip. Somebody probably gave a tip about who she ran into a few weeks ago, and they're researching that. So every one of these tips has to be run down. Now, the good news is when you put these photos out to the public, it creates this wall of noise, this cacophony of noise where all of this stuff is coming in. And all of those tips have to be followed to their natural investigative end, good or bad. They could be solid tips. They could be people who don't know what they're talking about, but they mean to do well. They think they saw something and they're incorrect. It could be boyfriend. It could be girlfriends trying to get back at their boyfriends by sending the cops to their house. So all of these things, good, bad, and ugly, they all have to be run down. And so that's what's going on now. So when you see this flurry of activity, we saw the SWAT teams run out the other day where they had somebody in for questioning and then let them go. And now we see the tent in front of the house. The tent in front of the house is probably to shield the press from what they're doing, and also probably to shield out sun glare. If you're using these forensic instruments, the sun glare will probably interrupt something, and they want to create a dark area. So as these tips come in, they create a flurry of police activity. And so when you ask me why are they going backwards, it's probably off of a tip, somebody that she met, and that person now has to be located, and so on and so forth.
And then Ralph, in terms of the family, so does the family in a case like this, are there investigators who, does the FBI say, okay, we're going to have somebody that's a liaison? The sheriff, obviously, they have some type of relationship with the sheriff there. How do they handle the family? Do they have like one point person? Typically with a kidnapping, how is that managed?
Well, here's where the conversation gets uncomfortable. You ready, Lisa?
Yes.
I have no doubt that the FBI has somebody with the family, tending to them, counseling them. But you and I and your viewers are not living in reality if we don't think that those FBI agents are also watching the family very, very closely. Who's running off to make a phone call in private? Why is that necessary? And this is the part that's going to get your viewers upset. And I understand it's a cynical way to be, but for me, it's the only way. Everyone is a suspect until you're not. And that's the bottom line. So yes, there are FBI agents with the family, and they're counseling them and they're helping them. If they're going to release a Instagram video, they're probably counseling them on what to say. But at the same time, they're watching every move that the family makes, and that's not by accident.
So they're basically, your mother is missing, your grandmother's missing, your loved one is missing, and they're there for you, but they're also watching you to make sure that, because is it often somebody in a close circle, the kidnapping cases that you worked on as a detective lieutenant commander, were these cases, did it often turn out that there was somebody in an inner circle or close to the victim that was, or to the person kidnapped, that ends up being central to the plot or the case?
The easy answer is yes. It's either directly related or by proxy or tangentially, whatever word we want to use. It's not, if it's not the immediate family, it is oftentimes it was an associate of the immediate family, right? If I want to kidnap somebody in my family, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to get somebody else to do it, right? So I'm not alleging anything. I'm just saying that everyone's a suspect until they're not.
And then Ralph, the media attention on this, it really is extraordinary. I mean, there's so many commentators, there's so many broadcasts about it. We're talking about it now, obviously, but our audience and our viewers are super interested in this. Do you think ultimately that's what's going to help lead to the tips that maybe will give law enforcement the break that they need to really find out who was that individual at that door with that gun, with that backpack, completely trying to conceal their identity?
Well, I think it's great that it's in the 24-hour news cycle. I think that's great for the reasons that we just talked about. The more you do it, the more it's in front of people's minds, and the more buzz you create about it. And I do think there'll be a resolution. I have not heard anybody that I've listened to. I have not heard anybody come up with any new investigative ideas. I mean, the FBI is very, very good. Very good. And I'm sure the sheriff's department is no slouch either. So I'm sure they have some great investigators there. I'm sure they have some great investigators and agents in the FBI. The FBI has an absolutely phenomenal behavioral assessment unit that just looks from a psychological and a sociological standpoint, the movements of the person by the camera. They try to come up with some kind of, some kind of prototype, some kind of standard look about what this person is,
Right.
who are we looking for. And so there are competent people involved, very competent people involved investigating this. And if there is duplicative efforts, you want that to be intentional, not because all the investigators are running around like a dart with no feathers. So I'm sure there's a command post somewhere. I'm sure that command post is staffed by people from the FBI and people from the sheriff's office, and they're working in conjunction, not in competition. Okay. And sometimes what we say in police work is co-opetition, right? Cooperation, but competition. At some point, all your cards have to be laid on the table. So I don't think that they're withholding information from each other. No one's alleged that, but it does happen sometimes, right? We saw that in the Gilgo Beach serial killer case out in Long Island, where the local cops weren't talking to the FBI.
Right.
I don't think that's the case here. I think they have one command center, command post. I think everyone's working together, and you got some competent people out there, Lisa. The FBI has some competent people out there that are trained to do this exact thing.
No, absolutely. And then, Ralph, you've spoken about it before, but I want to really get into this for our audience that's with us right now, watching on Fox Local and on YouTube Live, on the Fox 5 NY YouTube Live, which we're taking your live comments. The facial recognition aspect, when you look, the FBI showed, we've been showing them throughout the time that we've been talking, the face covered by the balaclava of this person at the door. You see the eyes. People think, okay, eyes can be identifiers too. What about facial recognition? And is there any hope of anything from that? Just that you could see that person's eyes.
Okay, so fortuitously for your audience, I'm an expert witness in the facial recognition investigation. So let me just say what I think, and your audience can take it from there. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Okay.
People put too much stock into what facial recognition can do. Okay, facial recognition does not present itself the way it does in media entertainment. Now, I understand that, but the software is limited to a degree. Okay, so on the one hand, do I want to submit that probe image to facial recognition? Yes, 100% I do. Am I optimistic that facial recognition software is going to identify somebody? No, I'm not. And the reason why I'm not is because you need a lot more than the eyes. The way facial recognition algorithms work are they measure the distance between the eyes, between the nose and the ear, and so much of his face is covered up that it's going to be difficult for the algorithms to put these points on the face, right? The ear is covered up. So, you can't see the helix, right? If he has a Darwin's tubercle there, you can't see that. What you can see is the inside of the eye. The corner of the eye is called the medial canthus, and you can see that. What can be done just by exposing the medial canthus? I don't know. We'll see what the software comes up with. Now, on the one hand,
I just lost his audio. Ralph, hold on one second here. Okay, we just lost, we're going to get back to
be a positive ID.
Okay.
Because we know that facial recognition is not an identifiable biometric like fingerprints or DNA or iris technology. Facial recognition is not an identifiable biometric. And so what we're going to be dealing with here is the computer algorithm's best effort, their best educated guess. based on what the computer algorithms come up with. That may or may not, my guess is may not, but it may produce a candidate list, and each one of those has to be run down and investigated, right? So facial recognition is going to be tough here. A large part of his face is covered, and a large part of the face that the software relies upon in order to get these measurements between the nose and the ear. The distance between the eyes probably could be measured, but not the distance between the eye and the ear. So it's going to be difficult. But having said that, there's no downside.
Yeah.
Let's take the probe image. Let's give it to facial recognition software
and see what comes up
with.
And then there was a report, I don't know, not confirmed, but a report about there might have been a partial glimpse in some of the visuals that were captured by those videos of a partial bit of a tattoo. If there's anything resembling a tattoo or that's an actual tattoo, is that helpful to investigators?
Yes, I'm having trouble hearing you now, but I think I got the question about the tattoo.
If
yes,
that's true,
any question, any even partial picture of a tattoo, I love tattoos. As an investigator, I love tattoos. Most of the, not always, but most of the time, they could be traced back to what it is, who did that artwork. Tattoo artists are very, very proud of their work. They're very, very particular. So unless it's a tattoo of something that's burned in very crudely, but if it's any part of a legitimate artwork tattoo, I don't know what's going to come out of it in this case. But generally speaking, investigators love tattoos, and I'm no different.
All right, Ralph, let's take a short break, and then we'll come back and just finish up with this. But we appreciate it. We're talking with former NYPD Lieutenant Detective Commander Ralph Cilento. He's also a professor at John Jay College of Police Science, and we'll be back with you right after this. Welcome back to this edition of Newsroom Live. I'm Lisa Evers, Fox 5 News reporter and anchor and host of the weekly show Street Soldiers. You can see our episodes right here on the Fox Local app and on our Fox 5 NY YouTube page. And we're taking comments, your live comments on the YouTube Live about the Nancy Guthrie case, what's happening with it. We've also been talking with former NYPD Lieutenant Detective Commander Ralph Cilento about investigations and what goes into these investigations, especially something like this that's being watched so closely by people all over the country and probably in other parts of the world as well. And I want to get back with Ralph Cilento. Ralph, can you hear me okay?
We can, as long as we keep the background noise down, because we're having some audio problems, but let's just do it. I can hear you.
Just tell him to, let me tell him to keep it down in the background, then he can hear us off this mic, he said. Okay. All right. Ralph, much has been made also too about the way that this person who was at the door was dressed, that the clothing. How do investigators, how do they even begin to try to narrow that down? Because to me, it looked like pretty much generic clothing you could buy at a lot of different places.
Okay, well, that's interesting. Remember, we were just talking about how you work the hot hand, right?
Right.
So we think now that the shoes are narrowed down to one or two different kinds. As far as I know, the jacket has been identified. The backpack will be next. So now what you do is, you just narrow down the field, narrow down, right? So you find out who sells this, who sells that, and then you get down to who's bought, who's purchased at least one or more of those items. Does that person match a description? And you narrow the field down. And it is absolutely excruciating, grinding work, but it can be done, right? You identify the backpack, you identify the jacket, you identify the sneakers, and then you say who purchased all three of those items, this many people, who purchased two of them. Now, if you get a tip in, and I think it's Joe Blow or whatever, then you start getting into Joe Blow. Has Joe Blow purchased, right? Then you start the investigation from the front side. So if somebody says, I think it was Jimmy James that was in the picture, then you investigate Jimmy James and you find out, did he buy one or more of these things, right? So it really comes down to like narrowing it down to who's purchased these items. first you have to identify the items, and I think they're well on their way to doing that.
Backpack, that was the other thing that stuck out to everybody, even those of us who are not trained investigators, is that the backpack looked like it was just jammed full of stuff. Is that typical of somebody going to break into a house having a bag like that?
No, that's very unusual, right? If you're going to break into somebody's house, and let's operate under the scenario that, I don't know, this is a burglary gone bad, right? If you're going to, and maybe the burglar was surprised by Miss Guthrie. We don't think that's the case, but let's say it is. Then when you're going to burglarize the house, your bag is empty, right? What are you supposed to do with your jewels? You don't have any place to put them. So whatever you're going to steal out of the house, you put in the bag. What I think was in that bag, I think he intended to go in there and kidnap her. And what I think was in that bag was not uncommon from what other investigators and FBI people think, that it was tools and material to, you know, to restrain her in some way. Maybe there was tape in there or a plastic bag or whatever, right? So on the one hand, this is what's so odd about this case. On the one hand, he comes prepared with tools to kidnap somebody, we think.
Right.
But on the other hand, he shows up to the house with no way to defeat a doorbell camera,
Right.
which to me says that he's unprepared. Did you not know where you were going to go to kidnap this lady? Like, why wouldn't you just bring a hammer and knock off the camera? Instead, we have this weird action of him pulling a bush and trying to cover the whole thing is very, very odd. And of course, we didn't even talk about the gun yet, right?
Let's
The
talk
way the
about the
gun
gun.
is slung
Yes.
down in the, in the front of his crotch like that. Very, very odd. I think that's a cultural thing. I think a lot of Mexican federales carry the firearm like that. But in this case, it's even more odd. I haven't heard anybody say this, is that it looks like it's a holster for a revolver. But the
Yes.
gun, the stock of the gun that's in there looks like a semi-automatic. So it doesn't even look like it's the right holster for the gun. Like he got the gun from somewhere else and the holster from somebody else. That holster is a revolver holster. That gun that he has in there, to me, looks like a semi-automatic. So he's a semi-automatic gun jammed down into a revolver holster, and it's swung in front of his crotch like that. Very odd.
Right. Like that shows you a lot of things, right? That unless it's a cultural thing and that's the way he carried it, or the other possibility would be that he's a novice. He's not used to handling guns properly.
Right. Well, I mean, it's more than that. We're not throwing a racial epithet at anybody. I know a ton of investigators in Texas and South Texas, and they tell me that this is like a south of the border thing, the way they carry guns like that. So it could be cultural, right?
Right.
I'm sure you're gonna have people that say, "I'm Mexican, I don't carry a gun that way." It doesn't really matter. It's a cultural thing from the South, and so it's not really what I'm responding to. What I'm responding to is that that holster is mismatched with that firearm.
No.
That's the very odd thing.
Absolutely. And then the other question too that I'm not clear about, and I know other people aren't, from comments that I've seen, is just like how she removed from the house. How is she removed from the house and taken away? Did we, unless I missed it, we haven't really gotten much official information about that at all.
No, and right, Lisa, there's got to be a vehicle involved.
Right.
We love vehicles. Now, we're assuming during this broadcast that they don't have a vehicle. For all we know, they might have a vehicle of interest. But investigators love vehicles. Your car is nothing more than a drivable cell phone. It leaves electronic footprints everywhere. It's constantly communicating. It gets picked up on license plate readers, on LPRs, traffic cameras, toll plazas. We love vehicles. If they don't have a vehicle, you can rest assured the minute they have a vehicle of interest, you can start an egg timer about how quickly the case will be solved.
And that's an important thing. We saw that with the Brown University shooting. Once they had the car, everything moved very, very quickly.
Right. And one thing that your viewers have to understand is that this is not, 5 or 6 detectives can't work on this because they're working on this. There are hundreds of investigators involved from the FBI, hundreds of agents, whatever the full weight of the sheriff's office is, you can believe they're working on it also. right? And so they can run down multiple leads at once. For example, somebody's working on the gloves. Those gloves are probably being flown right now to a crime lab in LA or back in Quantico, right? And so somebody's working on that. Somebody's working on the grid search. Somebody's working on pulling video. We understand from the FBI this afternoon, they're supposed to be releasing more video. I think Kash Patel said that himself. We don't know where it's coming from, but supposedly they're releasing more video, right? So somebody's working on that. Somebody's working on the jacket, somebody's working on the shoes, and a team of people are working on the backpack. And so we can multitask, right? Manpower, manpower, manpower. So all these things are going on at the same time. And the reality is they need to. They absolutely need to, right? Investigative prudence demands that you work on multiple things at the same time. You can't sacrifice one part of the investigation in order to achieve the other. It doesn't work that way, right? Manpower, manpower. So all of these different avenues of the investigation are all being run down with all the available horsepower they have. Believe me.
And then when you talk about the video, the back to the video from the images from the FBI, that was off a server, even though there wasn't a subscription to the Nest doorbell camera, but it was on a server. So a lot of people think, oh, if I'm erasing something off my phone or I'm erasing it off the off a hard drive or whatever, that it's gone forever. And it looks like there's other layers to video storage that might not be generally available, but that exist.
Right. So this is another thing that the general public has to understand, right? We're not better or worse because we're in law enforcement. We just have a different job. And when we have a different job, that allows us to understand certain things that the general public might not understand.
Right.
And in this case, I heard a lot of clamoring and clattering about the fact that it took so long to get the video. Ms. Guthrie did not have a subscription, which means that ordinarily Nest, which is really Google, was not translating those images to her and sending them to her server. What happens is her camera picks up images, picks up data, not images. And that data, it comes to them in a series of zeros and ones. So all those zeros and ones go into her home internet server. That server communicates with Nest, which is really Google. Now, because she doesn't pay for a subscription, it goes into the cloud, the cloud, the cloud. Now, when you ask them, hey, man, I know she doesn't have a subscription, but can we get something out of this? First of all, Google has to get on board, which they did. And then it is an extremely arduous process to go through all those zeros and ones and try to construct video, which they did. So it's not just a matter of you work at Google and I say, hey, Lisa, could you do me a favor, download that video? Yeah. It doesn't work that quickly. Right. Quite frankly, I'm impressed how quickly they did it. That's a ton of work to get Google to search all this data, come up with her location, her residence, that time, and then reconstruct that video out of data. It's not images. It's not like a VHS tape. It records data. That data is then assembled into an image. But because she didn't pay for the subscription, it just went up into the server as data, not an image. They had to reconstruct that. So I think everybody needs to really understand that. And given that situation, I actually think the FBI did a really good job. I mean, that was a 4, 5, 6 day turnaround. I knew they were doing that. I mean, I didn't know, but it seemed logical that they would do that.
Right, would try to do that.
I honestly thought it was going to take a lot longer. So good for them for getting the images as quickly as they did.
Right, and then this is opening up. Those images are opening up so many more investigative opportunities that we've been talking about. And you talk about the server and the car. That's how they ended up after a couple of years solving the Chinks murder in Queens South homicide detectives. The car that was rented had an old GPS. They got the location off the cloud, which was from a company in Canada. I mean, it took them a long time, but it was that same type of like dogged, really just classic dogged detective work, is saying we're not going to give up until we get something here, and just following it.
Right. And because this is going out to the general public, I'm going to tell you there's some secret squirrel stuff that we could do with cars that I'm not going to put out in the media, but cars are very, very useful. Very useful. You show me a car, you could start the egg timer.
Right, till there's an arrest. Ralph, we just have a couple minutes left. What do you think we should be watching? What's your sense of maybe the pacing or the stage of developments? What are like the key things that we really need to be watching for that will be milestones in solving this case and hopefully bringing Nancy home?
Okay, well, one of the things that's going on right now, which I want your viewers to understand, this is huge, is they are processing those gloves for DNA. DNA is tremendous, so we have to watch that. If they get DNA, it goes into the CODIS database. This is the combined DNA information system. It goes into that. They don't get a match. They start working on familial DNA, right? Many cases are now solved by familial DNA. I mean, remember the Brian Koberger case was solved by that, right? They couldn't get to him, but they got to his dad, right? And said, "Oh, you have a son," right? So that's very, very big. If to get to retrieve DNA from those gloves, right? Not only that, but hopefully, from an investigative standpoint, pardon me, from an investigative standpoint, hopefully the victim's blood is on those gloves from a prosecutorial standpoint, right? And so we have to watch for that. Also, let's watch for the afternoon video coming out. Apparently, the Cash Patel said there's more video coming out this afternoon. We have to continue to work the forensics that we have, right? There are ways to come up. You're not spitballing. There are forensic ways to come up with somebody's height, like within a half an inch or so, right? I mean, just for your viewers, just think about common sense, right? You have the video from her foyer. There are bricks. Her house is made of bricks. All the FBI has to do is go and measure one of those bricks, and then you have a perspective measurement, and you can nail how tall the guy
And then how
is.
tall
This
he
is
is.
not rocket science or any police secret squirrel stuff. This
Exactly.
kind of stuff
It's
is done
common sense.
all the time
It's
in
common
every
sense.
police department.